Welcome csc103 to our networking part 2. We'll talk about home networks a little bit more in this PowerPoint, which I think it has maybe about 20 slides. Again, I'll try to make it as quick as possible. So we're going to talk about a home network configuration, which a lot of people have, the networking hardware that you may need or that you may see related to networking, and wireless devices and networks. Concern, security, connecting to your router, which a lot of people have to do, even though you might not know anything about it. It's not that hard. And finally, IP addresses and MAC addresses, exactly what they are, and we'll talk about that. First of all, your basic home setup of your network. Most people have this kind of setup, even though it doesn't look like this with a big cloud, but you may have internet coming in through DSL, through cable, some method coming in, and usually what you're going to have first is a modem, which is going to translate that information into digital signals. So the modem, it does a modulation. That's where the term modem comes from. It does modulation. So it translates those signals so your computer can read them, basically into digital information. And usually that's supplied by your cable company. You typically won't be buying a modem and putting it in, even though you can, but usually your internet company, who's ever doing that, will take care of the modem. They may also take care of the router, or you may buy a router. And the router is really what's going to translate everything to other devices, to your computers, to your phones, to TVs, and things like that. Now here's another setup, and the only difference here is there's a modem router kind of combination setup, and this may be something that your cable company might also set up. You could still wire this into another wireless router that you can use, but that's another setup that you might see. And finally, another setup is, again, internet coming in, a modem, and then a wireless router, which you could buy anywhere, and it won't have this big antenna thing that looks like an oil well on top, but matter of fact, it might not have any antennae on it at all, but if it's a wireless router, it'll allow phones and TVs and laptops to be able to connect without having to plug in to the router itself. Linksys and Netgear were typically the more popular manufacturers of routers. There's a lot more now than there used to be. This is a more modern looking kind of diagram here, although it doesn't show TVs, but it does show laptops and backup devices and tablets and printers, but now you'd see TVs, you'd see all kinds of things in a home network configuration. And again, here's just some bullet points here. I'm not going to read all these, but obviously on a home network, it's not just TVs and phones and computers and printers anymore. There could be garage door openers and security systems and cameras and all kinds of things like that that can be connected to your home network. Now, one of the main things that is going to be on your network is going to be a router. And a router is something that you'd have to manage a little bit, even though you might just plug it in and not think about it. If you want to change the name that shows up in your network, if you want to show your family name or something on the router so it doesn't just say Linksys or something or Netgear, so you can identify it, that would be the SSID. And you can also set up your Wi-Fi password so that people in the household can connect and nobody just driving up on your street can connect to it. Now, you can use a default password that comes with it, but they're probably easier to hack by hackers because there's probably some database of all the manufactured passwords out there somewhere. So usually you want to make up something that is easy to remember for your family, but not necessarily for everybody else. And they don't look just like this. They come in all shapes and sizes. They don't always have big antennas sticking up from them. Another piece of hardware, which you probably won't encounter a whole lot, but it's called a switch. I have one in my house, and it's in our basement. So we have lines going down from bedrooms that go down into a switch that then get wired up into the router. That way, you could have a number of devices kind of connect to a switch and then get wired back up to the router again. And that's if you need more wired ports to be able to do that, or if you have more devices that are connected with Ethernet, you could do that. We used to use these in the Mac lab a lot, and you might see this at school a little bit, but it's probably not something you're going to have at home a whole lot. But if you ever heard that term switch, it's kind of like a power strip for Ethernet, where you could kind of connect a bunch of devices into it, and then that could go back to your router. But it's not really managed. It's not something you log into and you'd manage a switch. It's just kind of a plug-and-play kind of device. Now, routers we'll talk about a little bit more. So it is like a switch, but it can be managed. So it's like a smart switch. And you can log onto it with your computer and set up your passwords and your usernames and things like that. And they handle DHCP and NAT, which we'll talk about. DHCP is Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. And it basically dynamically creates IP addresses for devices on your network. So that's what dynamic means. It's happening all the time. So there's not static IP addresses. There's dynamic addresses that that can be changed on your network. So that way you can just kind of plug in your laptop and it'll automatically be assigned an IP address so it can be a member of the network. There's also something called NAT. This is something that you probably won't hear of a whole lot just in your everyday life, but it's called network address translation. You don't have to worry about that too much, but I have videos on that, so I'm not going to talk much more about that. Now, the media that these things connect with, the first thing on the left side there is coaxial cable, and on the right side is fiber optic, and at the bottom is Ethernet. Now, coaxial cable typically has that connector with the nut in the back. That's the one you hook up to your TVs, and it's really a pain to twist those things in the back, so that thing can be a pain. Ethernet, the one at the bottom, that'll have a big plastic jack on it that looks like a phone jack, and that will be used to connect. You'll see them in school. A lot of the computers still use Ethernet instead of Wi-Fi because it's a little more secure. And actually, before the heads are on there, before the plastic heads are on there, they actually have eight wires coming out, 4 twisted pairs of wires, and I've put the heads on these things. They're not easy to do, but you actually have to slip them in 8 little slots and then kind of clamp the head on there to get that to work. But if you have to wire stuff, you can't always have the plastic head on when you're wiring it, so you have to put it on after the fact. And the other one on the right side is fiber optic, and there's little glass strands in there. I haven't encountered fiber optic much and haven't worked with it, so I'll let that up to some of the videos that I have about that. And this slide is about the different types of Ethernet, which is the one I was showing at the bottom. And typically these will have the plastic heads on them. But keep in mind that there's different types of Ethernet cables. So if you just like found a whole bunch of it and you were like, oh wow, I found all this Ethernet cable, I think I'll wire my whole house. If it's older Ethernet cable, it might not have the same speed. So as there's different speeds occurring, different cables have higher speed, so you have to keep that in mind. So if you just had a bunch of old cable laying around, you might actually be slowing down your network if you tried to use it. Now, here's what the ends of those look like. When we're talking about Ethernet, it has an RJ45 connector. It's a little bit bigger than a phone jack. And now this one is kind of already kind of attached to it and has a little gripper on it, but you can actually put those things on. There's a crimper tool that you can actually, you slide the little wires in and you crimp it on the top so that it doesn't pull off. But they kind of plug in to the back of printers, into the back of routers. A lot of laptops now don't even have these connections in them, so you have to use some kind of adapter if you want to plug into the network, because so many laptops now are basically designed to connect to Wi-Fi, not use Ethernet connections. Even though Ethernet connections are more secure than Wi-Fi, and they have less interference than Wi-Fi. Older computers will always have a network adapter on the back that you can plug into, and typically printers, except maybe the very newest printers that are Wi-Fi printers, but printers would always have these, not always, because some printers would just be USB, but if you had a printer that can connect to a network, it would have a jack in the back for an RJ45 connection. Now here's some facts about Wi-Fi and 802.11, and the only one here just to kind of be aware of is this 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. And the only reason I mention that is you might see that. I know on our Wi-Fi, there's 2 choices, one for 2.4 and one for 5. And you might just think, oh, well, I'll use 5, that's the fastest. And it is faster, but actually the 2.4 has less interference. So if you're further away, you'd probably want to choose 2.4. If you're right next to it, you might want to choose the 5 gigahertz. So, and there's a video about that as well. So you don't have to take my word for it. You can watch some videos from some experts who know more about this than I do. And again, just some wireless concerns that I mentioned before. Wi-Fi is susceptible to more interference. Walls, you don't want to put a router right next to a concrete wall, or you stick it in your basement or something like that. It can be a little harder to connect to. So there's a lot of things you have to think about. Even things like microwaves and phones and electric. There's all little things that can create interference with Wi-Fi. So sometimes if you're having issues, maybe your microwave's running at the same time as you're trying to connect to something. Who knows? There's also security concerns as well that you have to think about with Wi-Fi. But your home Wi-Fi is definitely going to be a lot more secure than if you just go to some Wi-Fi spot at Panera or somewhere else. Wireless security, again, I'll let you watch some videos about this stuff, but some words you might see here is your SSID, which is basically your ID name that your wireless network will be identified by. So maybe you'll change that so you see your last name on there or something, so that it doesn't just say the default Linksys or Netgear. And your password so that everybody can connect, whether they're using their phone, whether they're going on a TV and they're trying to log into Netflix or something like that. they might need the Wi-Fi password to do that, or for gaming and things like that. And usually it's using WPA, which is the newest kind of protected access for Wi-Fi. And you can manage your router. You can log into your router. If you are having problems with it, you can log into 1.92.168.1.1, or just look up how to connect to my router if you have a Linksys or Netgear router. And you could connect to your router and set up the password and ID name. It's really not that hard. You go to routerlogin.com and set it up if you need to, or even just to see what devices on your network. You can do that, and it's really not that hard. Devices on your network, they might have something like 192.168. That doesn't mean they're the only devices in the whole world that have those numbers, but they're the numbers that they're using for your network. Remember, they're dynamically assigned, so they're dynamically assigned to your network. So that's the IP address. Every device on your network will have an IP address, and it's that 4-digit address. Not 4-digit, but it's 4 numbers, and each number goes up to 255. So it would actually be 32-bit. Each one is 255. So I think I'm missing a dot there in the middle there of those two X's. So there should be a dot there. And also there's something called a MAC address. Again, like NAT, you're not going to hear about this too much, but the MAC address is the ID for the device. Every device, a printer, phone, computer, they're going to have their own number, and this will not change. And MAC does not mean anything referring to a Mac computer. They all have one, and that doesn't go out on the network. But that's how your devices are identified. Oh, here it is. Machine Access Control ID. So you might see something like that. And if you look at those numbers, you might remember that they're hex by seeing numbers and letters mixed in there. So 2F, that one that's 2F, that would be 2 16s, which would be 32, and the second number would be 15. So you'd add them up, and that would be your number for 2F. Anyway, that's your MAC address. And your IP address this is the one I have the right dot in there. And again, this is 32-bit, and these numbers go up to 255. So this one is saying 168.192.1.1, but the IP address is what identifies your device on a network. And they are assigned by DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. So they're assigned when you plug them in, or when they join the network, they get assigned. Just like if you'd go to your car dealer or something and you're getting your car worked on and you logged into their Wi-Fi, you would be assigned an IP address. So they know you're on the network. When you log in there, they would be able to identify you, but you would be assigned an address when you're a member of their network. And that's it. That's the end of part 2. And hopefully that wasn't too painful. I'm going to have some videos for you to watch on some specific topics by some experts. They're actually very short videos and very entertaining videos because they use kind of this 3D animation and stuff, and they kind of explain things very well, probably better than I can as far as networking goes. So make sure you watch some of those when I assign them.